Hey, welcome to Accidental Gods, to the podcast where we believe that another world is still possible, and that together we can make it happen. I'm Manda Scott, and I spent the first series of this podcast laying out the basic toolkit that we think is essential to making conscious evolution a possibility, which is the entire premise behind the whole Accidental Gods project, this podcast, the website, and the membership program that lies behind it. We spent the second season finding people who are using those tools to lead the world towards transformation and the more beautiful future that our hearts know is possible. And now we're in the third season, where I want to begin to lay out a vision for that more beautiful future. The old Welsh socialist Raymond Williams said, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing." And I want us to be truly radical. Nothing else is good enough now. So the act of making hope possible means that we need to see a clear path forward to a world where our lives have meaning and agency, where they have coherence and connection to the web of life in a way that allows us to feel as if we're an integral part of something strong and resilient. And that brings me to today's guest. Abel Pearson is a visionary and a dreamer in the deepest sense. He's a regenerative farmer who runs a community-supported agriculture project at Glasbren in West Wales that is at the forefront of creating a different way of relating to the land. Abel brings a spiritual dimension to all that he does, and his account in this podcast of his practice has such deep integrity and real grounded authenticity that I found it utterly moving. This was one of the most deeply moving podcasts I've had the pleasure to record, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So, people of the podcast, please welcome Abel Pearson of Glasbren. So, Abel, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. Thank you for taking time out of what sounds like the busiest time of your year. How is it over in Wales?
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here. Real honour to be invited onto the Accidental Gods podcast. I'm a real fan, and it actually came at a really interesting time in my life and my personal journey as a grower and living on land. So it feels very fortuitous and very synchronistic, which is wonderful.
And you have rain.
And we have rain. Yeah, I'm sitting in my little cabin under a big oak tree in the Welsh rolling hills between the Taf and Towy rivers in the west of Wales in Carmarthenshire. We've had the first rain for many weeks, and it's a real relief. I was out there celebrating in gratitude this morning for some rain, because it's been quite a harsh time of watering. We grow on about an acre of land for our veg boxes, but we kind of like to water by hand still, which is possibly strange for people growing on that scale, but it's something that's quite important to us as a ritual each evening, to be in contact with our plants and to see everything that's going on, but also to give an offering. And we often mix in our sort of homemade biofertilizers, which is our way of bringing our woodland microbes into the soil, and that just feels like our way of giving back for everything that we take. So we've kept up that practice despite growing to quite a big size. But after many weeks of doing that every day for a few hours, it was starting to take its toll, and there was a rust starting to settle on my muscles and bones for sure. So glad of a rest, and perfect.
Brilliant. So thank you. I'd really like to talk about hand watering and about the rituals that you do and about your spiritual connection to the land, which sounds really deep. But before that, if we take a little bit of a step back, just to give everybody listening a picture of how Glasbren came about, how it is that you are farming an acre in the west of Wales. You don't sound Welsh. So can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to be there and what the aims are of what you're doing?
Sure. So I was not born in Wales. We moved to Wales when I was 9, to this very place actually. So this is the land that I grew up on. So I still walk in the woodlands that I used to play in as a child, and a lot of my family are here, and we're all doing this sort of together in different ways. And I wasn't particularly interested, to be honest, in land and agriculture or permaculture or any of these things, and until I went away. Really, I had to leave this land to kind of discover these things. I left when I was 18, and I suppose I spent a lot of time between now and then in kind of wild places, mountain landscapes mostly. Mustering sheep in the Southern Alps of New Zealand, or
Hmm.
working with horses, learning natural horsemanship in the Alpujarras in Spain,
Wow.
and yeah, and then ended up in a place called Ecodama in the Catalan Pyrenees, which is really where I suppose the transformation happened that led to this. I initially went there for a week, for an immersion into permaculture, deep ecology, and nature connection, and it was a highly transformational week, both from the content of the course and kind of weaving together practical activities on land that could allow you to live in a sustainable and regenerative way, with kind of a deeper, radically ecological way of being and way of starting to feel our oneness and our part in nature rather than separate from it. That kind of idea
Hmm.
of we are nature. I've actually, it's interesting because I've a bit of a side note, but I've heard you talk before in the podcast about the difficulty of certain words and language, and nature is one of those words that always crops up for me, about how
Yes.
the very word nature in itself kind of facilitates that separation in a way, and
Yeah.
oversimplifies, in a way. But for the purposes of communication, I think it's helpful.
I'm not sure actually, because I think it perpetuates the separation. I try
Mm,
and talk about the natural world or the
mm,
world outside the
mm,
windows, or something
mm.
that has slightly less of a sense of other
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, and yeah, I try to use maybe the web of life as well, because it
Yes.
sort of honors that complexity, um, and yeah, that it can't just be sort of reduced into a single entity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and that week was, I remember taking myself off running onto the limestone cliffs that they have there, and having a really profound experience with a really profound experience of being, of my own wildness, and of being in flight with the vultures there. I went running
Wow.
along the cliff tops, and I was scrambling up in the sort of midday heat, and as I reached the top of the cliff, I was sort of level with this vulture, just sort of hovering only a couple of meters away from where I was, and there was just this like this
Wow.
thump in the stomach that I'm sure you're familiar with, of like
Yes.
being just awestruck and being set upon by the awe and the wonder of the natural world, and I suppose something in the running and in my own physical movements and my own physical nature at the time was, there was a feeling of real kinship and of being in flight. And I only talk about that and tell that story to sort of, yeah, illustrate how I was having I was coming across a lot of content that was sort of giving form to a lot of the thoughts I've been having, but at the same time having experiences in this kind of valley of such power and gravity that were, yeah, a felt experience of that, then I suppose.
Hmm.
That experience is the commonality, I suppose, of all the things that led to this, is kind of trying to bring together physical activity and a more sustainable and regenerative way to be on land, and a radically ecological way of being on land, and with a very personal, felt, deep rooted connection to the natural world. And I suppose in being called back to Wales, there were a number of reasons, I suppose, but I think I remember at the time it was something to do with wetness, dampness, green.
Hmm.
In Catalonia it was very dry and hard to grow food, and we worked
Right.
really hard on building, and it was almost monastic in the way of like, moving rocks and meditating together, and it was a wonderful, rich time, but there was some calling back to the green lushness of home, um, and I think I was starting to think about how I could fulfill my social conscience and how I could fulfill this need to be in service to the earth and be in service to all beings.
Had you been brought up with that? It sounds like your parents presumably they'd gone to West Wales, they'd
Mm,
taken you as a
mm,
9-year-old.
mm.
Were they already heading in that direction? Have you taken them deeper than they already were, or are you continuing family tradition?
I mean, it was such a brave and courageous move that my parents took. They had, to my knowledge, no experience of farming or of growing or of being on land at all. Really, my dad's always been very practical. He's taught himself a lot of different practical skills and is very self-reliant in that way. So I think that really helped.
Hmm.
But yeah, they made a huge brave step, and it took a lot of vision to see what the place could be, because it had become quite run down and neglected.
Right.
There were there was, the woodland was full of rubbish that had been dumped there, which was a common story at that time for farms,
Yeah.
and and yeah, and I think all of their friends were kind of taken aback by what they were doing. They thought they were kind of crazy, and only as the years have gone by have I realized what a sacrifice and what vision it took.
Yeah. A huge move.
Yeah, and slowly I think that the farming came, and yeah, living self-sufficiently came to them, and I suppose that's where they've come from, is that trying to be self-sufficient as much as possible. But they've done lots of different things. They fostered children for a long time, and
Hmm.
they have holiday cottages on the farm now.
Right.
Yeah, so I suppose
Okay.
I introduced permaculture to them, and some of those techniques and some of the ideas around how to be a little more kind of whole systems in our approach and in our thinking. And yeah,
Okay.
um,
So you came back from Catalonia,
mm,
drawn back by actual rain,
yeah,
which is good now that we have some.
mm,
Um, so so you've got an acre
mm,
on your parents'
mm,
farm, and you are now beginning to run that as a commercial business. So can you talk us through some of the sense of your vision for that,
mm,
and particularly of the spiritual grounding in the earth and what you're hoping to do in a wider sense with that?
sure. So I would say that the vision arose out of kind of starting to realize that we're trying to look for a way to make this idea of needing to shift our consciousness to a far more ecological consciousness, or as I was saying, kind of, if we're going to approach the challenges of our times, climate change, ecological collapse,
Hmm.
but also social problems, like diet-related health problems, isolation, loneliness, the breakdown of our communities. I
Yeah.
was looking for something that my work on land could, that could encompass all those things and try to, in a small local way, start to address some of those issues. And I suppose I started to realize that growing food feels like and felt like a really
Hmm.
democratic and universal way of doing that. It's not exclusive in the way sometimes certain worlds, and the permaculture world can feel and can be. It can,
Yeah.
and I was looking for a way to reach out with that circle, reach out with the bubble, and bring in more people to the ideas and to the feeling of it, and to the, without using language that was alienating, or and yeah, growing food. It may be cliche, but we all eat. And we all
Hmm.
eat 3 times a day, and that's an opportunity 3 times a day for each of us to have a relationship with our local land. And because our diet has become so globalized, we have no connection really to where that food comes from, who grows that food, the story in that food. Um, we have no connection to how it was grown, the impact of how it was grown and transported. So seeing a local food system and a local community food project as perhaps the best way to start talking about issues of sustainability, to start bringing people together in meaningful community, and start to address health, and not just dietary and nutritional health, but mental health as well. There's such links between health of soil and health of gut and health of mind, and
Yes.
slowly over time, this web has unraveled of how everything is so connected in that way. And
Can you speak a little bit more because this may be new to some of our listeners, the concept of the health of the soil, the health of the gut, and the health of our mind. And then I would like to move on to, because I think this links to spiritual health, but just in a purely materialist sense, the soil biome links to the gut biome, links to our mental health. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So many people say that we are more fungi and bacteria than we are human. So the amount of life in our gut is so huge that it makes up more than the rest of our body in total. So and there's a lot of work going on, and I'd recommend someone called Zach Bush if anybody's interested in finding out more. There's a lot of work going on and a lot of research going on in the link between industrial agriculture, weed killers like glyphosate, Roundup, and the health of the gut lining, which in turn affects the health of the cells and is being linked to increase in cancer rates and autism. And essentially those chemicals work at breaking down the communication system between our cells, is my sense of it from my very limited sort of scientific capacity. It just feels like our mental health and our health in general is directly linked to the health of our soil, and that brings us into such intimate connection with how our food is produced. And that's only possible on a local level because you need to have a relationship with the grower and the land that it's being grown on, and be able to have that transparent relationship where you know how the food is being grown, and you know that these chemicals are not being used.
So in case it's quite unlikely, but in case we have any industrial farmers listening, can you talk a little bit about, because they always say we need the chemicals because otherwise we cannot produce enough food. This is the argument. This is Monsanto's argument of the only way to feed the world is to destroy it fundamentally. And yet, you and I know this isn't true. I'm hoping that the people around you are beginning to learn this isn't true. So in purely agricultural terms, can you tell us about the practicalities of growing in a way that does not involve the chemicals, and which is going to enhance, and I'm hoping increase, your soil biome, the number of bacteria and fungi in your soil, so that the life of the plants and the lives of the people who eat those plants are enhanced?
I think, and it's important for me to say that there's no judgment in what I say. There's no kind of criminalization of individual farmers. I totally understand the system in which people are trying to operate, much like most of our industrialized capitalist systems. It's a harsh master, and to be able to make a living in financial terms from farming is really hard. And these are the reasons that people have been driven to increase in size and start using these chemicals and the seeds that go with them, and the machinery, and and it just gets bigger and bigger, and it's sort of it's never ending. And I can see, having done it as well, how hard it is to contemplate trying to do it in the way that we do it, because it's really hard when you're trying to have a product and trying to deliver veg boxes to people on a weekly basis, guaranteed, but also be in relationship with the earth and also be in relationship with pests, and trying to stay in a kind of surrendering relationship where you're not you're not trying to dominate.
Yeah, and probably not defining them as pests anymore. At
Yeah,
some
exactly.
level,
Yeah,
we need to
it's a
change our
total
relationship.
perception shift that has
Yeah.
to happen between us and pests and weeds as well.
So, in terms of actually the land, you've got your acre. Can you give us a bit of a kind of earth shovel, hands in earth? What have you actually done on a practical level with this land?
So the land that we're actually growing on it would be considered quite marginal. It was, when I took it over, quite a degraded rocky paddock on quite a severe slope actually, which would probably turn most market gardeners away from it. But
Hmm. How severe is severe? Or can you get a tractor on it?
no, you couldn't work it with a tractor. I've done some digger work on it in the beginning, in the shaping of the terraces and the swales and the contours, but no, nothing other than that, I wouldn't say.
Right. So we're talking 30 degrees or more.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay. So you dug some swales. That was a starting point.
as a permaculture designer, that was quite an interesting challenge, to start to look at how we could start to build organic matter and soil again, and how we could work with one of the main problems being that we have a heavy clay soil, and with a slope like that, the water and rain had taken a lot of the good soil to the bottom of the hill, and we had about a meter of good soil up against the fence at the bottom, and looking at how we can work with the water to kind of build soil, but also unlock the mineral potential of that water and keep it in the land, rather than letting it run off. And so essentially we have a no dig system. So we have permanent fixed raised beds, designed to be optimized for human labor. So they're all 70 centimeters wide, because that's kind of believed to be the best size of bed for humans to step between, and humans to be squatted in the pathways working the beds. And
Okay. So it's basically 2 arm lengths across.
yeah, so all designed for human efficiency, and yeah, the no dig system. The idea being that we don't disturb the soil, we don't disturb the soil biology. We leave the structure intact, and we just add organic matter every year, much like the forest does.
And where do you source your organic matter?
A mix, really. We make a lot of it ourselves, using hot composting techniques, and also we do bring in some from our local council facilities. So they offer an organic compost made from the kind of green waste and tree prunings and wood chip from around the local area.
Okay.
So that's allowed us to be no dig from the beginning, to have that organic matter imported. But in time, we're making a lot of our own wood chip compost, and we're obviously moving towards closing that loop on the farm.
And is that because your parents have planted trees that you are now felling for wood?
Yeah, so my folks planted about 1,000 trees in 2012. But we also have willow coppices that have been cut many times, and alder coppices, and so those provide a regenerative source of wood chip.
Right. Brilliant.
But also, we get a lot of donations. We get a lot of donated wood chip, because there's a lot of tree surgeons working locally who would dump it otherwise, and kind of bring it round and give it to us for free. So that's really helpful to be able to bring in those waste materials from the local area. So
you're beginning to get a kind of circular economy going locally.
Yeah. Well, I suppose what I said about kind of trying to mimic the forest is kind of informs everything that we do. It's kind of looking to the natural world, to how natural ecosystems function in a sustainable way within their limits, and yeah, a mix of trying to close the loop on the farm, but also using waste materials from the local area that wouldn't otherwise be put back into the system. Feels like a way to fulfill that.
And are you finding that people's attitudes are changing? I'm imagining that already you have quite a high percentage of people who understand permaculture principles and circular economy and closing loops. But are you finding that what you're doing is changing hearts and minds in the area around you?
Certainly, yeah. There's definitely pockets of awareness, and there's with our One Planet development policy that we have in Wales, which has allowed people to create low-cost, low-impact dwellings on land in Wales, and build eco-houses and live from the land. And that has brought a lot of people into Wales and into West Wales. That's created all these little pockets of kind of living in permacultural and regenerative ways. But I'd say where we live here, we're still in very much a traditional farming area, and it's not particularly economically well off, this area, very working class. Yeah, are we having? I think we are. I think we are. I think I've noticed in the time that I've been doing this a huge difference in general awareness around the climate and the environment and the need to eat locally. And I suppose that comes from a whole range of different reasons or stimulus or catalysts. I think probably Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future and the kind of increase in awareness around the climate last year and the year before has really driven a lot of people our way.
Then the virus.
The virus, yes, definitely, since the lockdown happened, since the virus came into our lives, interest in veg boxes and local food for me has surged. I feel like we've had so many requests, and I've just felt just an increased willingness and enthusiasm for what we offer. It didn't feel like we needed to push. We didn't need to really work hard like we have done in previous years to find our members and find the people that wanted to engage with this kind of project and this kind of unique experience. And I think that's a combination of obviously people being stuck in their homes and needing delivery, needing food delivered to their homes. But I think it's also people starting to realize the fragility of our quote normal systems, our fragile food system, which really, in a crisis isn't fit for purpose and is very fragile, very unresilient. And starting to realize that local food and local community-based food systems and support systems are what people can rely on. And I think it's been a really interesting time for reflection on that front. We've seen so much beautiful expression of mutual aid and of community and of pop-up support structures, and we've seen it here at the garden as well. We've really benefited from. We were able to find a way to work with some furloughed workers who wanted to volunteer, and they've given so much of their time to help us still achieve what we wanted to achieve without our usual setup. And
brilliant. And
just offers of help from our community of members, to do deliveries or to make things easier for us. I think not just having a local supply of veg available. I think there's something that people are yearning for in being part of a cohesive and authentic and supportive community that you can rely on. And I think crisis, as painful and as full of loss and suffering as this crisis has been, I think it's been a catalyst for that.
So can you tell us a little bit about the practicality? Your members pay a subscription, and then if you have a crisis, if the rain hadn't come and there was no water, for instance, would they continue to pay the subscription and just understand that there wasn't going to be so much?
Yeah, so we try to operate as a true community-supported agriculture scheme, a CSA, which is probably more common and familiar to audiences in the United States, and in Australia it seems to be much more common as a model. But there are several. There's probably 100 in the UK, and there's definitely 5 or 6 in Wales. And essentially, the community-supported agriculture model is a total reimagining of the relationship between consumer and producer and farmer, in which the risks and rewards of farming are shared. So the understanding that farming is seasonal, and farming in relationship with the earth and farming in an organic way, comes with a lot of challenges and comes with a lot of struggles, but then can also deliver such amazing rewards and such a beautiful harvest. And so it's tying the consumer and the producer together in a relationship. Where, as you say, there's a weekly subscription we offer our members to even contribute for the whole season in advance, which many choose to do.
Brilliant.
And that's basically a pledge of, it's a pledge to say we support you for the season and we support you to grow the food, and we will take whatever is coming out of the garden that week, depending on that part of the season. And there's, our first boxes are generally a little bit leaner because this time of year we've just come out of the Hungry Gap and there's not so much variety. But then come August, we've got, there's an abundance of variety, and we can put so much more in the boxes, and we're sharing that, and it just feels like it sort of flips that relationship where food is no longer seen just as a commodity, product that you buy, with a sort of faceless relationship to the person who grows it, but it's
in plastic boxes, and it's the same every week.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing we do guarantee, that we use no plastic in the boxes because we don't need to. We don't have an organic certification because we don't need to, because the members can come and be directly involved in the growing. They can see how it's done. Right. And members, they receive between 7 and 10 items of mixed fruit and veg every week, and fresh herbs and salads. We also put in a wild surprise, we call it, so something foraged from the wild, edible, that they can try. And
who creates that? Do you go foraging for it?
We do, yeah. We have, last year we did it for every week, for every box. Wow. I think because we've increased dramatically this year, we're going to have to do it slightly differently.
And what kinds of things would you be putting in for your wild surprise?
So this week, for example, we've got plantain going in there, which is a very common weed, grows in fields and hedgerows, and I suppose a big part of the experience for people is how we communicate it. So we put in a sheet with the box every week, which is called the Veggie Love News, and which was named by my wife's German mother. And and it's our way of kind of having that transparent relationship. So on one side of it, we write something about how we're growing the food, or why we're doing it this way, or something we're thinking about, maybe some of the challenges we're having, whether it's a drought or too much water or late frosts, or these kind of things. And also, we have recipe ideas, and we have information about the medicinal properties of the food. And
because plantain is one of those amazing things that you can make tea, you can make poultices. I was drawing a splinter out of my dog's foot with it. But people won't know unless you tell them. Yeah,
exactly. And we've already had feedback from last year that it's totally revolutionized people's dog walks, and and that says something about just a little bit of knowledge about what's around you, how much, what new dimensions of the natural world that can open up for you. And it speaks to what we're trying to do, I suppose. It's trying to use food as a powerful vehicle for doing
and
that.
For reconnecting people to the land.
Yeah, exactly.
Which sounds really as if you're achieving that. So can you tell us a little bit, because when we spoke earlier, you spoke very movingly about your spiritual connection to the land and how you're bringing that into what you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I suppose it's particularly relevant to the lockdown, because I've noticed since the lockdown, and maybe having more time, or maybe it's something to do with the fact that we had a son. Our son was born on March the 1st, and just before the lockdown, and that's created a bit of a shift in me, and in the urgency to go out there and find or deepen that relationship with the natural world, but more so with the land I'm growing on, and the ceremonies and the practices and the rituals that feel authentic to me and have meaning for me and have meaning to this land and this place.
And are you creating those in conjunction with the land, you and it together, or are you following a particular system?
No, I've tried to just, I suppose they're informed by a Celtic earth-based spirituality as what
You're in
the
West
closest
Wales.
I can find to a kind of a lineage, if you like. But more so, I'm trying to just listen and trying to just listen for what the land has to say, and because I want to be able to offer my son something. I want to be able to offer him the kind of ceremonies and rituals and rites of passage that will allow him to have a relationship with the land and to feel in kinship with it. And it very much feels like I'm walking around, almost kind of feeling my way along the dark, damp, passageways of that I might be able to lead him through one day. And
Because you had been sitting out. You'd sat out overnight, I think, at
exactly, and
Beltane.
that was on Beltane. I went out for a couple of days fasting, just in this forest here, which is interestingly something I haven't done here. I've never done here, and I'm sure many people have the same way. You go off to sort of wild places to find these kind of experiences. You try to go to dramatic landscapes or mountain landscapes or into caves in the Catalan Pyrenees, but there's something about going into my local acre, my local land, this land I'm working, and trying to have something like, trying to go there for answers and just to listen and just to hear what the language is here and hear what, and start to feel something like an indigenous connection, I suppose. And using that word indigenous very carefully, because I'm not, without trying to appropriate, and that's something to do with the, coming up with the rituals and ceremonies that I want to engage in is being really clear not to appropriate anything and anything doesn't feel authentic to me in my life and my lineage and ancestry. But to be indigenous to mean, of this place, not from this place, but of this place. And and that's, I suppose that's taken the form of working with what I call the kind of twin gods, really, gratitude and grief, mainly. So I have a practice that I've been doing for the last few months, which is I leave the house early and while everyone's still sleeping, and I walk to the river that just runs along the bottom of the garden where we grow the food, and I go to the river and I sort of call in the four directions and try to create a bit of a ceremonial space, and then just allow a stone to choose me. Basically, I sort of see it as a stone in the river choosing me, and whichever one calls out, I take that stone and I speak to my gratitude for that day, which is at the moment is brimming, because I'm grateful for my son every day, and also grateful for life and health, and when there's so much death and suffering around in this time. But it can be anything, and then I take that stone and sort of walk slowly up the hill through the garden, past all of our crops and everything that we have growing, with that stone kind of weighing in my hand, and then I place it on we sort of have an altar it's a fire pit where the fire's oriented to the south, and we have a sort of an altar that's rises up above it, and I just place that stone on the altar, and slowly over the months, a cairn has started to emerge, and to sort of symbolize the power and the weight of that collective gratitude over time, and that's been something that just came as something I wanted to start doing, and it feels very true to me, and it feels very honest and simple and
beautiful. It
beautiful,
sounds really beautiful, and it
and
sounds really grounded. I love it. Sounds gorgeous.
And just gets deeper and deeper, as time goes on, and it just starts to feel more a part of me as time goes on.
And by the time your son is joining you, if he chooses to join you, that cairn will be quite substantial. unless any of the stones decides it needs to go back to the water, which of course they may. But yeah, and I'm wondering, listening to you, at the start of our conversation, you spoke about the vultures in Catalonia, and I am very aware of the red kites here on the other edge of Wales.
Yeah.
Wondering if the red kites are speaking to you in the way the vultures did.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember during my 2 days, there was a moment where a kite just kind of came down super low. I must have been still for long enough and present for long enough that I'd become a part of his view, and he just kind of swooped through at really low level and
Fantastic.
gave me a nice flash of all his colors. And
Yes.
it's the kite is the kind of the bird of this area. If we're going to talk about the majestic sky bird of prey. And there was a moment actually as I first made my grief shrine in the woods, and we have this area that we've been working with that we'd like to become a ceremonial space for doing work with our course participants and things. And it's a unique place because it's the only place in the whole forest where there's the rowan tree, and it's the only place in the whole forest where there's the birch. Because the rest is just all oak, ash, hawthorn, kind of traditional deciduous forest of this area. But there's this area where there's the only rowans and the only birch.
Wow.
And at the base of a big giant fallen rowan, I've created this grief shrine, which as I was building it, and speaking to the hawk of dawn, or to the bird representing the east, red kite came soaring through the break in the trees in that moment, and really just shouted loud, kind of. Yes. And because I was kneeling there almost begging for some answers as to what am I supposed to do now. I'd made this shrine, and it's actually made from the bones of a goat that I buried myself maybe 10 years ago now. I was quite young, and I had a close relationship with this goat. His name was Gandalf, and this old gruffly billy goat. And
magic.
And so I had taken it upon myself at that time to dig his grave by hand, and I remember it being a very intense experience. I even remember getting very sick after it, which is interesting. And then years later, we were doing some digger work on a space that was going to become a space for our polytunnel, and his bones were dug up by the digger.
Oops.
But had also previously been dug up by animals, I think. So there was they'd been collecting over time, and so I gathered all those bones, and I decided to bring them to my grief shrine. And because of feeling, I suppose, a sense of something binding us together, because I buried him, there was some kind of something that bound us, and maybe the symbology of his bones would help me come into a closer relationship with grief and with death and with mortality, and maybe feeling like once I feel that's something that's feeling real, maybe I can then ceremonially bury those bones again, but I also found myself once I'd made my shrine, kneeling there and kind of begging for a voice or answers that would tell me what to do, how to do a grief ritual, how to do this authentically, how to do this in a way that's real and with meaning. Because I've held really powerful grief ceremonies within the context of the work that reconnects, which is amazingly powerful to bring together everybody's grief in a circle. And but in terms of a personal daily practice, and in terms of a way to do it, a way to evoke those spirits of the wood, or a way to evoke a ceremonial space around that, I was feeling like I need some answers. And that was the moment that the kite flew. Or it was a kite, I think. But
sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Gosh.
And it just, yeah, it said something, and it said something that maybe I can't put to words. And I think, that I think I talked to you about this in our conversation before, about how sometimes there isn't words, there isn't a big, there isn't a way to talk about the experience, and sometimes it's not even a grand experience. It's not a
Most
blowing you
often.
open kind of experience. It's just something that seeps in, something that
Yeah.
deepens, and something that.
And changes the texture of who we are, in my
Mm,
experience, somehow. And it's only looking back that we can go, that was a turning point. And it wasn't as if it was, I chose to go left when I could have gone straight on. I moved a degree one way or the other from the trajectory that I
mm,
was on. But
mm,
then that
mm,
brought me here, because a degree over a lifetime takes you to a very different place.
mm,
That's so very, very, very moving.
mm.
Really, I am sitting here with tears flowing down my cheeks. Thank you. So, taking that as our springboard,
Mm,
I would really like to look forward to your vision of how the world could be if we got it right.
mm,
In your own land, in the wider context, however you see it,
mm,
Abel, what would your vision be for a world where we've moved towards flourishing?
mm. Well, I can certainly speak to food and farming and my own land here, and um, I suppose, yeah, to bring together those two things that we've been talking about farming and agriculture, and a sacred connection to land, or a ceremonial connection to land and earth, and kind of understanding that that's, for peasant farmers around the world, that's been the way
Hmm.
forever and still is, and those people still feed most of the world,
Yes.
and that kind of, yeah, that relationship of reverence and using ceremony as a way to give thanks for what we reap from the land, and to honor the fact that being a grower and growing food and farming links us with a long line of people who have had their hands in the soil, and have produced food through the seasons, and that cycle has gone on and on and on, and will continue to do so beyond us. And I suppose that's one thing that I think we need to do, is to reimagine or rediscover what it means to be a farmer. That's something
Hmm.
that I'm doing. It's like how to move in a dance with the earth, and kneel in prayer in the dirt, in the soil, and listen for the dreaming of the land. Um, Finding again the child's wonder in the germinating of a seed,
Hmm.
and giving thanks for the sacrifice that seeds make, and to humbly kind of take our place, pull our chair into the circle of life, and just dig in, and root, and acknowledge that we're not just food producers, we're beauty makers, we're the keepers of the seeds, and we're the keepers of the stories that go with those seeds, and we're protectors of the earth, and we're stewards, and we're partners of the earth, and that's something that I'm starting to feel, that's shifting my own perspective as a grower from a very much a sort of utilitarian, like being stuck in the doing, in the things
Hmm.
I have to do to produce food, to get it to kind of a more reverential, more surrendering relationship.
Right.
As well, I'm learning a lot from doing this project and growing food in this way, and using the CSA model of sharing the food, is that I think food and farming have such potential to address so many of the issues that we're facing. And if we're trying to reimagine and vision a different world, I think these kind of models are what we need to see. We need to put we need to put farms and food at the heart of communities.
Hmm.
We need to, I think we need to reimagine our lifestyles so that we have the space to eat well,
Yeah.
space to go and be on community farms, go and be involved in growing our food. Because for me personally, I don't necessarily feel like everybody growing their own is the answer. I think it's wonderful that so many more people are,
Yeah.
and I would never discourage that. But I think if we're looking at a true alternative system, I think we need to be looking at community supported farms where people can support growers to do the work that they need to do, but also reap all of the benefits that are there for, the benefits of being in touch with the soil for mental health and for physical health, and combating isolation that we have in our communities, and just all the things that I've talked about that we've seen during this lockdown. If we could normalize those things, not just during a lockdown, not just during a crisis, but to see those things as normal, and to give people the space and release the pressure on people that forces them to work, so hard, and which is a vicious cycle with a convenience food system. I suppose I just imagine I imagine land filled with people, and I think I spoke to you about the first time that the vision of the garden being filled with people was realized, the first time that we had people kind of snaking through all the different paths, working and helping to grow their food, and then being able to give them all a basket of food at the end of the day was hugely moving, and just seemed right. It seemed like, and I think, and there's something to be unlocked. There's a willingness to give in community that I think a lot of people have, but that is maybe locked up, and that just needs to be given the space to unfurl, and that takes away as well a lot of the financial pressures on farmers that force them, as we were saying, into those practices, into those ways of doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing, because we can rely on our community as much as they can rely on us.
So it's about unhooking the financial pressures from the creation of food and the sense of stewardship of the land, and then allowing that surrendering into relationship that you were talking about.
Yeah, and that question can get very political, which I don't know if we want to get into that right now, but there's a lot that can be done on that level to support this kind of food and farming, and Brexit was potentially an opportunity for that. I don't know if we're going to see that opportunity realised through this current government, because it requires a government with far more vision and compassion and genuine green mindsets and care for the earth. So
without getting too political, and in the assumption that this government is not going to deliver that because it's too busy trying to break the economy, it seems to me that we can do this from the ground up, that in a way we can render the politicians irrelevant.
Yeah, indeed. We need and keeping it small, keeping it hyper-local, and just forging genuine, authentic communities around these small farming projects.
Do you think the people who have volunteered with you, who are furloughed, are they expressing a desire to work less for the system and be able to spend more time with you? Is that a reality?
Absolutely, yeah. That's really happened. That's people who have maybe got jobs that mean they have to work indoors all of the time have said to me that this has totally changed their outlook. They want to have more time to be outside. We've had people talking about just questioning the whole concept of what they were doing, or of work in general, and of what work is essential and what work isn't, and what is a meaningful way to spend our time, and to see people so willingly giving their time, for no monetary reward.
Yeah. But then you don't need monetary reward if you have food and shelter and housing. Yes, let's not get political. I can feel myself
but
getting there. But we could
just
do
such
this.
an exciting possibility, and
if enough of us say we're just not interested in your system, you can have your system if you want it, but we don't want to take part in it. Then that system will wither.
Absolutely.
Without us, without us having to have a revolution, we can have it from the ground up.
And I think that model of business, that it's a bit more kinder and more community focused, and is perhaps something that can be rolled out to, across the board. It doesn't just have to be food. To have business where they are supported by their community.
And doing work that is relevant.
Yeah,
That's the key, isn't
that
it?
is relevant and needed and essential, and yeah.
And then all we have to do is work out what is relevant and needed and how we're going to do it in a regenerative way. And there we
Yeah,
have it, our new
absolutely.
reality.
Yeah. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I think that's been my learning from this whole time, really. Yeah.
Mm. And you teach people. So if people wanted to come and learn from you, is that
Mm.
possible? Do you have
Mm.
woofing schemes or something similar to that?
We have offered woofing or through HelpX actually, which is a similar concept but just a different organisation. We have weekly volunteer days for local day volunteers, and we've been exploring our course and workshop structure. Something we wanted to offer this year, but we've had to cancel all of those programs. But we've been exploring like what is our unique thing to offer. What is our, because we don't want to do kind of how to tutorials on how to grow, and because there's plenty, you can.
Yeah, YouTube is full of
YouTube
those.
is saturated with that stuff, but it's I think what we're looking to offer is kind of an immersion an immersion into the experience of growing food this way, with the natural world, with a relationship underpinned by a deep connection to nature, a deep understanding of ecosystems, how everything works, but also with a reverential, ceremonial approach to giving thanks for the food and giving back to the land. And I suppose kind of an initiation experience into becoming a food grower, or a peasant farmer, or an earth steward, essentially. And we're going to probably offer that through a mix of day workshops and immersive residential courses, retreats.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's what we want to be offering, and yeah, it's very exciting, and I look forward to being
It
able to do
sounds very exciting. And we will put a link for all the people who are at this moment going, I want to do that,
that.
because that's so in
Yeah.
line with everything that this
Mm,
podcast and Accidental Gods is heading
mm.
towards, that I imagine that will be very popular. So there will be a link in the show notes,
Wonderful.
people,
Yeah.
for how to
Yeah.
connect to that.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our hour. It's been so rich and so profoundly moving, just for me talking to you, and that sense of grounded integrity that you bring to your work is unmatched, actually, Abel. I am so in awe of what you're doing, and the sense of genuine spiritual connection to your land and to the people and to the trees and the red kites and the mycelia and the bones of the goat on the altar. It sounds really very, very profoundly moving. Your son is such a lucky person.
Oh,
So is there any last thing that you would like to say that you haven't said?
um, no, just to express my gratitude for you reaching out and for the opportunity to be here and to speak about my personal experience and my personal journey, because it's something I don't get to do very often, and it's um, yeah, and I also honor the work that you're doing. I think it's so powerful, and I'm so grateful that you're offering it to the world, and you're offering these voices to the world. And yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So that's it for another week. Enormous thanks to Abel for taking the time out of his growing and for sharing the depth and integrity of his practice. If you want to connect with Glasbren, to join the scheme, or to go on any of the courses he described, all the relevant links are in the show notes, which are on the blog page of our website at accidentalgods.life. There's a transcript of the interview there as well. We'll be back next week with another conversation looking into how the future could be different if we choose to connect with what matters and what's real in our lives. In the meantime, thanks as ever to Caro C for the music at the head and foot of the podcast and for the sound production. Thanks to Faith Tilleray for being the other half of the creative team that is Accidental Gods and for designing the website. If you want to see what she's created, that address again is accidentalgods.life. You'll find the show notes there, the other podcasts, the visualizations and meditations in the Pandemic Resources section, and the Accidental Gods membership program. This is a structured training designed insofar as we can to give everybody the chance to connect to the web of life with integrity and authenticity and grounding in ways that make it real. We need to do this, people. We need really to connect. So Abel is helping you, and we're trying to help you. There are so many ways to do this. Do what works for you, but in some way, each day, just do it. And if you know of anybody else who would like to be active in bringing about the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, send them the link. That's it for now. See you next week. Thank you, and goodbye.